The information contained within this podcast is general in nature and should not be construed as advice nor substituted for qualified professional counseling or mental health therapies. If you are genuinely in need of deeper assistance, please seek the advice of qualified professionals. Welcome to the Unpacking Grief podcast with Drew Marriott and myself, Ian P.F. McDonald. Join us as we delve into what grief is, how it can differ for each of us, and how we can explore techniques for healing and growing to help both you and those around you in processing grief.
All right, welcome back. This is episode 5, I think we're on now. How are y'all doing?
Big number 5. We're doing all right. How are you?
Excellent. I believe there's a third party in the room, Drew, tonight. We've got our first guest. Could you do the honors and introduce us all, please?
Introduce myself?
Go for it.
Jeffrey Newman, also known as Nuisms. I'm an artist.
Wonderful. How do you two know each other? Where did this all start and how long has it been going now, friends-wise?
Well, I will say that through my relationship with Scott Tajarian at the Weekly Transit, I came to see Jeff's work and through the Instagram world started following. And after Zach had passed, it was one of those things where I felt called to work with Jeff. And we decided to have a painting commission in his honor, something, meaningful to adorn the walls where he spent so much time here. And it was a wonderful process to go through. I never, requested such a meaningful piece before, and Jeff was excellent in terms of just saying, "Hey, man, this is kind of what it'll look like." I gave him the picture that I wanted to work from, and then kind of left it in his capable hands. What the finishing product is, we'll drop into for you guys to take a look at. That's hanging on our wall. And then this is the original photo you can actually also see on our Instagram, Unpack Grief Pod. But yeah, it was the beginning of a wonderful relationship. It was certainly something where, again, our universes kind of collided, and we stayed together since. So I felt that Jeff would have been a great guest here to talk about his own situation. He's done some work. I Want to Be Jeff. It's a one-man show. That's something that kind of gave us a tease into his personal story that I'm sure covered a gambit of so many years. But I felt grief and relation there was one of the themes kind of in the undertones. So wanted to learn more about you, Jeff, and your personal story and your journey.
Yeah, well, thank you guys for having me. I did I met as Drew said, I met him through Scott, and I've known Scott for a long time. And working on that commission was I had done a bunch of commissions before that, and always doing commissions can be a bit tedious. You know what I mean? I have expectations. I want to please the person that I'm doing the commission for, and I knew a little bit about Drew's story and Zach's story. And it was great listening to the first podcast because I talked with Drew recently about it. I got to know a little bit more about it. And doing that commission was a strange experience for me because a lot of stuff came up actually. I didn't have much of a relationship with my father. And I wrote a show called I Want to Be Jeff Newman, where I go into a little bit about my father and my relationship with my father and my relationship with my mother. My father died when I was 19. And we had a very contentious relationship. And my mother passed away in 2019. So 40 years in between all that. So I was a different person from both of those experiences, which was interesting. And through the process of that length of time from 19 till I don't know how old I was, in my late 40s, I'd gotten sober, and I wasn't sober at the beginning of my, in my 19 years, I was not sober. And that kind of drove me, that I used that as an excuse for a long time. The relationship, the contention I had with my father, and then the jumping off point of how to deal with that. And so, when Drew and Deanna watched the one-person show, I Want to Be Jeff Newman, I sent him a link to that, which I produced out here just about 4 or 5 months ago, and it deals with all that. It's about me becoming me, and me wanting to become myself, and owning that over it. And that probably started in my 40s, like early 40s. It took me that long to be like, oh yeah, like this is who I've been trying to become. And yeah, I don't know, that was a little bit off track, but
No, no, definitely good.
I've got a couple of questions. Firstly, what's your Instagram so people at home can check you out and see the work that we're talking about?
Nuisms, Nuisms.
This show, I Want to Be Jeff Newman, is this something that they can find for themselves?
Not right this instant. It's not. I don't have it public because I have some stuff on there that I don't know about. Honestly, I don't know about the music because I use some music in the transitions. That's really the biggest issue. Otherwise, it's all, it's stuff that I wrote. But yeah, I might just drop it on YouTube and not care about it and see if anybody gets if it gets pulled down. But we haven't gotten there yet.
Excellent. So if anyone is wondering, just take a look. I'm guessing there's a link on your bio on Instagram. If it is live, maybe link it from there so they can find it.
Yeah, or you can, if you're on Instagram and you really want to see it, shoot me an Instagram thing, and I could always give you the private link.
Nice.
So with that, Jeff, I guess my question would be, and in terms of your grief, going back to your father, and then the 30-year fast forward, your mother. Certainly, we grieve differently for the loved ones in our lives, and then, as you said, where you were when the grief arrived as a 19-year-old, and then later as a 40-year-old. Were there any kind of things that stand out to you? Have you ever stood back and reflected on those processes and how you interacted with your parents after they had crossed?
It's such a contrast. I mean, at 19, prior to my father passing, I lost my grandfather about 4 or 5 years before that. And he was more of a father figure to me, if that makes sense. I had more of a parental father loving relationship with him than my father. And that was really difficult. I think I was 12 at that time. And that was my mom's father. And that really broke me open and closed me off, because my father basically turned his back on being emotional at all when my grandfather died. They were best friends. And then when he passed away a few years later, it was like losing him all over again, or losing my father again, but this time physically. And I was just so angry. I didn't know how to express any of that. And it wasn't, I went to therapy and tried to discuss it, but I really medicated it. And I think a lot of, I internalized all the pain. Maybe on some level wanted to die myself really for a long time, and didn't want to take the responsibility of doing that because I saw what it was to lose that at such an early age and to lose my dad. And it took me, I don't think I really grieved my father's death until I was about 10 years sober. And that's when it started to and that was, from doing 10 years in recovery. So I was doing some work in both therapy and then in recovery, in like a spiritual recovery program, and kind of thawing out, you know what I mean? And then in contrast with my mother, and that was about 20 plus years into my recovery. I understood and was able to show up for her in such a way. And also along my mom had a terminal illness called scleroderma. So over the past 15 years before she passed away, she was in and out of kind of ICUs and all that stuff. And then she would recover, with the joke was like, this bitch won't die. Like that was kind of the joke. And she was in on that joke. Like she was just, she was a very resilient woman and had a great spirit, and questioned about like all the stuff, she was like, I remember, and I had that conversation with her a few days, before she passed. I went home. She was several times when she had been in ICU, because I'm pretty spiritual. I Drew and I have talked about different things about the other side, or, I have a lot of, I definitely believe in some, this is not a one-off, you know what I mean? So, but my mom had confronted that many different ways. She was put on, she was in hospice before she passed. About 6 months prior, she was put on hospice and was unconscious. Woke up 2 days later in hospice and was like, I need a cigarette and a coffee. And then she was like, I'm going home. So she left and went home. And then 6 months later, she was going to be put back on hospice, but it was going to be home hospice. And she said to me, like, why did I make it through this to just be, like have to die now? And I talked to her about it, and I said, well, you get to say goodbye to who you want, and I gratefully I was able to fly home, spend a week with her, and just kind of have those conversations, the hard conversations, the things that she was worried about,
You talked about your father bottling up his grieving with his father's death.
It was my mother's father, actually.
Right. So with that, did you see any sort of recurrence in yourself later on with all this hindsight? Do you now look back and go, oh, I did the same thing in a different way?
I knew at the time I was becoming my father. My father was a rageaholic and not an alcoholic. Probably would have been happier. That was kind of like after he passed away, it was like my joke was like my dad would have been a little bit more fun if he was an alcoholic, but he was a workaholic and a rageaholic. And I knew I was becoming that. So, and then I was like, well, I'm going to have fun while I'm doing this. No, certainly I saw all of that happening, but I wasn't equipped to be able to understand what to do with that. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think, at least in my family, it wasn't talked about. Even my grandfather's passing, it wasn't talked about. It was like, I was 12 and I just was falling apart, and nobody pulled me aside as a child and was like, well, I don't really love the term, but it's, I like you guys, it seems very cliche, unpacking, right? But that is right. Like, let's take it out and put it on the table and talk about all these pieces. Nobody did any of that, let alone the idea that here we are, 3 grown men talking about the vulnerability of that. That's not something I came to easily.
How did that play a part in the belated grief that you mentioned?
Well, that was the kind of like the melting of the glacier. You know what I mean? Like, the melting of the glacier, which also came with heartache around, the only thing that I could try to obsess about, which might have been it was like a relationship that I couldn't make work. And then I think also at that same time, I was maybe a year or so into beginning to meditate, because this was like 2000 when it started to when I really felt like I was grieving his death was like 2004. You know what I mean? And he died in 10 years before that, and I think part of that was like the willingness to sit still, which took me a long time to do, was allowed all of the stuff, like I was a guy that I can't meditate. That's what I used to say. I can't meditate. I can't do all these things. And now I've been meditating steadily for, a really long time. And I can't imagine not meditating, and that, that process, changed my whole experience with the grieving and the passing of my mother. It informed all of that. And I don't have regrets about it, because my memory is like, I know that I asked her all the questions. I wish I would have like taped like our conversation so I could go back to it, about those simple things, like how did you guys meet, or, stuff like that, or about our family and stuff. Cause I don't really have any of that anymore,
I was going to ask you, Jeff, it was maybe episode 3, where I had mentioned, in the case of my father passing away in '98, it was only months ago where, and maybe resolving isn't really the word. It was a transmutation of sorts as well, that I had gotten on better terms over the years. I had gotten more comfortable with how things played out in our relationship. But it was really the fact that I was told that he was working with Zach on the other side, that, Zach was under his watchful eye, and the fact that while he may not have given me what I thought he owed me as a father in this life, on the other side, he is taking care of my boy. And so sitting in our little yard, it was literally a moment where I was overcome with emotion, and pictured my mom, like enjoying a Saturday evening with us, Zach and his girlfriend and my wife and I, just sitting around. And we literally went through the exercise, and I said, babe, like, I see my dad sitting here, my mom next to him, Zach, ourselves. And then as the night wore down, my mom would probably be the first to go up and say goodnight, and my dad would probably be the last to be out there. And being able to put that out there and literally see it in front of me, it was a beautiful gift to myself. And I wonder if that is something that you experienced. Was there an aha moment? Was there this outpouring? Was it this real feeling for you? How did it play out for you?
Well, I've done a few. Because I live so far. My father's buried in Pennsylvania, in Springfield. I can't remember the Jewish cemetery over there. Drew and I are that we found that out.
We had that conversation earlier in the week. Yes.
Yeah, we have a similar stomping ground. There's been a few times. I know my father gave me as much as he could give. You know what I mean? Like, I've worked all of that. I've done a lot of work on that, and I don't begrudge anything. Like, he did the best he could, and just, and I would, like, I wouldn't be who I am without that man giving me what he could give. I don't know if I've done the visualization, but I've also, like, I've gone to see mediums and stuff like that. And I just know in my heart that, like, what killed my father to some degree, because he died at 44, was a stubbornness and an inability. He was never taught how to communicate. Like, I really think that, I do him in my heart, like, that inability to talk about anything that was going on inside is what kind of crushed him. I've traveled, back to Pennsylvania a few times, to sit by his grave and kind of smoke a cigar and just be, the first was before the incident that I'm thinking about, where it kind of cracked me open in 2004. At the beginning of that year, I went back to Philly, saw some people, and then went on, like, a trip, like on a walkabout for about 7.5 months, in Central and South America, and then came home. And then I remember, all of this stuff happening, and I was meditating, and I think I'd written, like, a letter, and a catharsis happened where I was like, oh, like, I started to see kind of the paradigm of the relationships that I was kind of pursuing. And I had a big catharsis around that. But I think about my dad and my mom every day, you know what I mean? And yeah, I don't know if that really answers that question.
Yeah,
No,
it definitely does. You talked about how, communication is such a big part of what you're describing here, and how his communication of emotions wasn't really something that was, second nature for him, or even first nature. What's your evolution been with learning to communicate honestly with yourself?
the irony is my father was a corporate litigator,
Ah,
and a very good one, a very good trial lawyer. But he couldn't talk about what was inside. Um, and that has been, a continual process for me um, to allow myself to step out on a ledge and be seen, and not curate exactly what I think everybody wants me to look like. I mean, I have my own, and I talk about this in the show. It's just like what I think I'm supposed to be and look like versus what's going on inside me. Like and I think if I look this way, it's going to solve all these problems. But the truth that I've come to realize, and I think, I'm not alone, because my fear is that all of the feelings that I'm having are only happening for Jeff. But when I have the bravery, when any of us have the courage to talk about what's actually going on between our ears, and we feel alone, isolated, hurt, jealous, all these things, that we are able to, like, we turn on the light and we're like, oh, I see you. It gives me more juice to go to the next moment, to have those moments again. I don't. Did that answer the question? I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, it's something that I had spoken of before. I mean, take the moments as they come. In terms of your stage presence and your production. It's as much as you can script it, you've got to also be able to go off script, and in the end, same thing in your trade. So I'd like to know if, in terms of where you were, and I hope this makes sense, did you grieve and did you reconcile for just your present self at that point in life? And what I mean by that is, did you also reconcile with the 19-year-old? And if not, what advice would you have given your 19-year-old self? Because I had a gentleman, a young man, reach out to me through Twitter when he saw my post, and he had explained he had lost his father in a motorcycle accident, and we started a relationship. We have a bond, and I would check in on him, and he was very generous and shooting me a note when he could, and I think of him, and it's with him in mind that I ask you that question.
I think it's my responsibility to go back and parent every part of my trauma as a child. The grieving one, so the 19-year-old, the 12-year-old, that lost my grandfather, that then lost my father, like all of those things. I do, especially today, more so today than ever before, but when those feelings of isolation or loneliness come up, I kind of do a meditation within myself to go back and kind of parent. If I'm by myself and I need a little bit of a pep talk, I do a lot of talking to Jeff by himself. You know what I mean? And kind of the, like, look, man, I'm like, you're okay. You're not alone, and you're not abandoned. I'm not going to abandon you, because I think the message that I felt as a child, because that's truly what I wrestled with, was the abandonment of love, whether it was my grandfather, who I felt was teaching my dad how to be a father. And then my father, so when he died, my father turned his back on the whole relationship. He couldn't do it. It was so, like, that, him losing my grandfather, his best friend, was so painful that he just was like, I can't do this again. He didn't talk to anybody about it. I've talked to my uncle, my mom's brother, about it recently, actually, and he was like, oh yeah, I didn't realize. Like, he was like, because his father and my dad were best friends. You know what I mean? He was like, your dad was a great guy. I was like, yeah, well, my dad, when your dad died, my dad stepped away from being a dad. Like, he just was a provider. He was a great provider, but he had no interpersonal skills. So I was abandoned. So a lot of the work that I've been invited to do through every relationship is this thing of abandonment. It's about, me not abandoning myself, because I think through my, you know, my excessive behavior was all about trying to abandon myself to some degree.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I feel like there's probably not a listener out there, regardless of their stage of development, who can't connect with that. I think we all have some format of abandonment. I mean, speaking spiritually, if we come from a place that's completely love and light, just the act of being in a human body is a form of abandonment from that kind of intensity. And I think we spend our whole life trying to seek it out. I wanted to just sort of like go deep into now for you, you know, in line with the show. You've done this amazing one-man show, right? About you, by you. The amount of learnings that would have come through just that process would have been huge. So right now, summary on you and the journey and how this, you know, this emotion we go through called grief, how it's shaped you and where you are today and what's next.
I think the beauty of having have had both experiences was that, like with my mother, I've grieved, but I did a lot of that grieving with her. You know what I mean? The relationship was very open and free. There was a free flow. So the relationship, like even within the show, I didn't have as much. The car stopped and all these things came forward with her because I went through them all. I went through a lot of, like, some of them, because I don't, like, I even in the show, like, I didn't think that some days there's this one piece in the show. It's like, I don't know if I miss anybody, you know, but I do miss my mom, you know, and I didn't realize how much I didn't realize that she was as much of a champion in a way. So moving forward, like, it's super important for me to acknowledge the people in my life that mean something. You know, we are inundated and bombarded with the idea of, like, get what you need outside of you. Everything you need is outside of you. And I think collectively we are shifting. It's been you know what I mean? The three of us are probably in the similar age range. So Generation Xers have come through this strange place of, like, dial phones to now, like, on our phones on our wrists. And we do have the power to stay connected, and that's where all the juice is. You know what I mean? It's like, I know people that have so much, and they still miss the easy stuff. You know what I mean? Yeah. So moving forward, it's just the things that mean the most to me and that feel the most genuine are the connections that I have with people and the times that I spend with them. And sure, I want to have a little bit more money so I can do some other things, but you've heard it, like, you can't take it with you. You can't take that stuff with you. And I do think you the the relationships and the strength of that relationship, I think Drew's kind of a testament to that, is that it does transcend time and space. Like, I know, strangely, I talked to Drew about this. Like, when I was working on the piece, there were certain things that would happen in my studio when I was working on Zach's piece that still happen when I'm working on something, and I think about Zach, and I never knew Zach. Flicker of a light, you know what I mean? Then my lights don't normally flicker, you know, like that was happening when I was making that piece. And so I think that we do transcend time and space. This is the illusion of separateness, as you were talking about, Ian, is kind of the remembrance of who we truly are. And I think we spend a lot of time. Yeah, it's like getting back to, and it doesn't, you know, people, and you will come to it when you come to it. Like I don't want to be on my deathbed and think about all the things I could or would and should have said. And I think that the sooner I wake up to that, hopefully I'm just going to be surrounded by people I love and not be like, oh, get in line. I need to talk to that guy and I need to tell or that person. You know what I mean? It's like, hopefully people will know, you know.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's easier said than done, because it's like what Drew was saying, like just stepping into being truthful about how I'm feeling in an instant or in an incident or a circumstance, and being responsible and acting with love and service is kind of where I want to live. But it's terrifying at times.
Ian, I will say that I saw the reaction, and I would offer you a opportunity to talk about Mom, because it hit you when he mentioned it. What was on your mind there?
Well, it was just a similar thing, like for me, I don't know about you, Jeff, but for me, Mum was the rock. She was the one that was always there. So, just realizing how much of a hero role that actually plays, not only in children's role, but she was there for everyone. My brother went over to Brisbane after she passed to, sort out the affairs, because I couldn't get there. And my sister, she did tell a bunch of helping, but it was mostly my brother who was like, I'm going to do this. So he realized I knew this, but he hadn't seen how much community was around her. And, it's when you look back that it really hits you, because it's for me, these gaps where you don't think about someone, and then when you think about them, everything all comes at once. Like when you just said what you said before, and in a moment, without even thinking, I got tears in my eyes and I'm missing my mum and I want to sneak off the camera to have a little cry. It's so special. To put it this way, when you are at your happiest in life, let's say you've just had the most happy experience with someone who means the world to you, the feeling there is so close to the feeling of sad remembrance. They feel the same way, where you're just like overwhelmed with this emotion that makes you want to cry. And I think there's something very telling in that, because the state of joy and the state of looking back at someone in sadness at the joy essentially have the same kind of thing going on. And it really becomes this little hint to me about what underpins the experience of life as an emotional experience.
Well, even time, right? That's what I hear, is that, and time is what we use as humans to act. I don't know how, like, we don't even understand it. We understand what time is, but if you watch or listen to or you read about, whether it's death experiences or whatnot, it's like time is just a construct that we as humans use to delineate this experience. And what you're talking about is, or even when we talk about dreams, like our feelings and our dreams are very, like, they can't tell in our brain can't tell that it might not be happening truly. Right. So time and space is, again, just a perception of here and there. You know what I mean? Yeah.
I love this topic, and it might be a better topic for my other podcast, so I might get you on there as well. I have another podcast called What Even Are We?, which basically, it seeks to answer that question, because, we still to this day don't know what humans really are, why we're here, why you wake up looking like you do on this planet, and then having to figure out how to live through things like grief. So it'd be good to bring both of you on and have this conversation go for a little longer, because all three of us really have a lot of information in that realm, and maybe we can do a few episodes there as a series.
Would love that. Yeah,
I would love that.
Is there any one piece of advice? I know it's never going to be one piece of advice, but if you were to summarize for the audience, like, what would you give as a gift to someone who might be going through a fresh or a first-time grief?
I think there's no timeline. You can Google, you can find out the stages, and you can get some information, but I think it's unique. It comes unique for each individual. There are times where I see other people that are grieving they grieve different. Everybody grieves differently, you know, and I think it has to do with our makeup, our belief system. You know, a lot of like sometimes I don't feel like I'm emotional enough. But again, like I can beat myself up with those feelings, or I could just be like, okay, well, that's the way it is, you know. Because there were interesting, like when I was running the show by myself, there were times where I would run the piece about my dad where I would start crying by myself in my apartment, you know, in my studio running the piece. And I was like, oh, this would be really good to happen on stage. It didn't happen on stage. You know what I mean? Like, you know, the same thing with my mom, you know what I mean? Yeah, so sorry, yeah, just to kind of have some compassion for yourself, because there's no standard answer. Like I think we live in the expectation that because it's supposed to look this way, and then there's a perfect way to go through it. It's like give yourself the wide berth to just be.
I was going to say, Jeff, that when you were talking earlier about your meditations and your self, questioning, that have you ever considered that the answers you were getting weren't you, but it was actually your dad speaking through you?
I totally. I think, you know, anytime I've sought, I'm a hopeful skeptic when it comes to like I believe in the communication of the other side. So I'm always, you know, I don't, you know, yes. The short answer is yes. I know
Zach's been present all day, and not to cut you down there, but that was the other part of what I wanted to get at. I wanted to ask both of you, have you felt anything extra today in terms of the energy and
yes.
Well, I think the last few days I've had a little bit of, there's some flickering in my studio, and like I said, every time I have that, I think of Zach. So, he's been present for me in the last few days for sure. But I think just leading up to this, and then, you know, talking with you and Deanna on the phone the other day. For sure.
Yeah. My day was, I started very early. It got more stressful as the day went forward. So in the end, 5:30 this afternoon, I was like, I'm just going to sleep for 2 hours. So I was kind of groggy going into this. I only woke up half an hour before we started, and it's put me in the perfect place. Like I've just got the right energy, and I thought before I started I wouldn't have the energy. So I can't help but wonder if that's divinely guided too, because it felt very stressful, but here it is being perfect. So.
For sure.
Jeff, fantastic. It was great to meet you, my friend.
Pleasure. Great to meet you as well.
Hey, Jeff, where can people find you?
You can find me at Instagram at Nuisms, NUISMS.
And definitely check out Jeff's one-person show. I want to be Jeff Newman.
On Instagram as well, I want to be Jeff Newman. At I want to be Jeff Newman is just the show. So either one of those are places to find me. The art is exclusively at Nuisms, and then the show has its own Instagram. So
fantastic. All right. Well, also make sure you come check us out on What Even Are We, because I have a feeling we're going to have some episodes on that podcast shortly, talking about some deeper concepts.
And Jeff, I can't understate how much we appreciate that you take the time and have taken the time to check out our program, and that you see honest value and thought enough about us to take time and spend with us and the audience. I hope somebody out there gets some insights that they wouldn't have gotten if it were just the two of us. And I hope to see you again here and on Ian's podcast as well.
Much gratitude, Jeff.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us on Unpacking Grief. If this podcast is helpful to you, then please subscribe and consider helping others to find us by rating us 5 stars on your podcast platform of choice, and by sharing us with your friends and family directly. You can contact us and keep up to date on Instagram at UnpackGriefPod. If you'd prefer, video versions of all episodes are available on Spotify and YouTube. And if you have any questions, suggestions, or would like to find any of our recommendations, you can do so on our website, unpackinggriefpodcast.com. Thanks for listening.